So as we progress along with 3D game art, we're coming into what feels like a new phase or whatever. A phase where high poly modeling is not really going to be the norm anymore because computers can handle more polygons. So your low poly of a couple years ago is way too low. And we're kind of coming into an age of medium poly models. And you still have high poly stuff that you bake down from, but even that's going to go away, I think, eventually, and we'll just end up doing, say, medium-high meshes and just importing them. But anyway, the point of this video is I wanted to run through this workflow that I've been experimenting with, and it's kind of a takeoff of medium poly modeling and the Boolean workflow that guys like Tor Frick are using, and it just gives you a way of quickly generating something to bake down from without having to go through all of the work of the typical high poly, the support edge loops and the weighting and the freezing of the mesh and all that. So we're going to dive in, make a test shape, just something with a bunch of cuts and things in it. I'll show you how to bevel the hard edges, and we'll do the we'll do the low poly as well, because really they're practically the same mesh, as you'll see. So let's dive in and get this high poly built. Okay, so the key to this is that you have to bear in mind you're not going to have your SubD routines later to save you, right? It's not a matter of throwing in some edge loops and adding a turbo smooth or hitting tab in Modo and having it smooth everything out for you. That doesn't exist here. So when you're doing your Booleans and doing your intersections and all of that sort of stuff, you need to make sure that you're using enough geometry to carry off the silhouette. And I'm not talking the low poly silhouette, the high poly silhouette. So you're going to be working with more geo than you're really comfortable with, at first anyway, until you get used to the routine. But yeah, you do have to get used to dealing with some kind of dense meshes. So here, for example, let's say I'm starting with this block. And what I want to do is I want to carve some sort of a curved chunk out of the one corner that has a rounded end. Now normally you would do, so I'm going to paste in a copy of the block here. And I'm going to grab the interior edges that are sticking into it. And once I have those selected, I'm going to hit them with a bevel tool. Now the bevel tool, this comes down, this is where you have to be aware of the amount of geometry that you're using. So if you want that to be a nice smooth curve, you're going to have to add facets to this bevel until you get to the level that you want it to be, until it feels good to you. And it's really just a matter of experience, but like around level of 6 looks pretty good for most shapes. You might even want to go higher than that because I see a little faceting, but you can probably get away with this. So for this demo, we'll just go with this kind of level. I'll drop the bevel tool. Now it's simply a matter of you subtract that from the world, and I have the Seneca Mendard scripts installed here, and he has a set of Boolean scripts in there that really help out with this kind of thing. But anyway, that's Seneca's pop-up thing. So if I hit the subtract button, you can see that I subtracted out that rounded shape. Now there's a whole mess of triangles and stuff in here, and I really don't care about that at all. You know what, I'm going to turn on my matte cap just so these shapes will show up a little better. So you can see that with the matte cap on, and I'm looking at the silhouette and stuff, this looks fine. This will be good. Right now it's all hard edged, obviously, but yeah, we'll get to that. So the other thing to keep in mind when you're doing your Booleans, and to be honest, you don't have to use Booleans, but I find them easiest in terms of doing this workflow. So you can do this however you want. You can hand cut the stuff out with the edge slice tool or whatever you want to do, but we're going to use Booleans in this example just because it's faster for me. My point was going to be that when you're doing the Booleans, you do want to pay attention to where your edges are falling, right? Because when I subtracted out that other block, you can see here I've got a nice sets of edges that line up with those with the polygon. So I don't know what I'm trying to say there. Yeah, I've got nice edges that meet up at the edges of the polygons. If you ended up with a whole bunch of triangles and half cut off stuff throughout here, it makes the beveling to come later much harder. So keeping your edges clean is really just a matter of lining up your cutter tools in such a way that it makes sense. And again, that all comes with experience. So I'm going to cut this up a little more, add some divots and things along the side, and I'll be right back. So here's the resulting mesh. We're going to use this for our high poly example. You can see that I've cut in a bunch of notches and things like that, added some bevels and added some chamfers and that kind of stuff to it. So this is going to be our high poly piece, whatever it is. Now, the crux of this technique lies in your ability to bevel any edge that you want to will not be razor sharp, obviously, which is going to be pretty much all of your hard edges. There's different ways of getting to that edge selection. You can do it manually. Obviously, that's an easy way, but time consuming. The other way is to leverage something like the Vertex Normal Toolkit that comes in Modo. So let's say that I go in here and I say, choose 30 degrees for an angle, tell it to smooth the mesh for me. And it does that, and it hardens any edge that connects two polygons where the angle is more than 30 degrees. So that gives me a nicely faceted mesh, but it keeps areas that are smooth. So then I can hit this button over here, which will select all of the hard edges for me. And that's very handy for this technique, obviously, because that saves me having to do a bunch of manual selections. Now we're probably going to run into issues when I start beveling, and we'll work through those in real time just so you can see how that happens. Yeah, I can already see there's going to be some issues. Okay. But that's the general idea. You select your hard edges and then you bevel, which we'll do next. So before the beveling fun starts, I wanted to say that if you're using Modo 10 V2 or higher, they have started to introduce a procedural modeling system, which adds this panel over here, which is kind of like their version of the max modifier stack, but it's definitely just taking its first steps into the world, and it has some issues, and it's the workflow is not really ideal yet, but it's getting there. We're not going to use that today because I'm just not that fluent with it yet. So, but know that you can do edge bevels in there, and that can be handy for, let's say you want to come back later and say, I made all the bevels too tight, I want to loosen them up or a little. I want to loosen them up a little. You can do that easily if you have a modifier stack. In the immediate mode that I work in, the workflow would be to duplicate the mesh off to a different layer, hide it, and just hold it over there in reserve in case I want to go back and rebevel. And the last thing I'll say before we actually do something, there's a lot of talking in this video, is that if you want to have edges with different levels of bevel on them, that's going to take a different set of edge selections, obviously. So just be aware of that. You may have to go back 2 or 3 times depending on what sort of a mesh look you're going for. For this demo, we're just going to do one consistent edge width. So one last step before we bevel is that since we have this mesh set up correctly, with the right smoothing, and we have our hard edge selection, I'm going to do a little housekeeping. So I'm going to rename this HP for high poly and duplicate it and call this the low poly, and we'll turn that one off for now, just to make it easier later, because this is pretty much your low poly mesh, as we'll see. But let's get on to beveling. So with all of the hard edges reselected and the mesh backed up for safekeeping, let's go ahead and start looking at the beveling. So the beveling is just an edge bevel, so we'll get it started. And for the parameters, I'll throw in a 1. And the round level is 2. Now, that's good enough for our demo purposes. You can play with that on your own projects later. Now your job now is to look around at the mesh and look for issues. Look for topology issues, because you'll probably have some. It mostly comes from when you have, like right here, we got this edge here that wasn't included because it's not a hard edge, and it shouldn't have been included. But you get this T set up. And when the T bevels, you end up with a weird a mess of triangles there that can end up in a pinch and causing weird problems. So what you have to do is hit undo and go back and fix your edge selections so they include all the edges that you need to include. And it's typically, stuff that wasn't lying on a hard boundary. So to fix that, we select those edges and we reapply the bevel again. And I see I have a nice quadded transition there now, which will smooth nicely and not give me an error. Now there's probably a few more of these issues around the mesh. So I'm going to go, right here for example. So I'm going to go ahead and fix those up. And when I come back, we'll talk about how to fix the smoothing. So with the topology issue settled, what I'm going to end up doing, or the next step I should say, is we need to fix the smoothing, because it got all janked during the beveling. But luckily that's super simple. We're going to be employing the techniques of the face-weighted normals. We've talked about this in previous videos, and I'll put a card link to it in case you're not familiar. But again, using the vertex normal toolkit, we'll set this smoothing angle to 179 and just tell it to smooth the mesh. And see, all the jank goes away. And now, from just spinning around the mesh and looking at it, those edges are all nicely rounded. And this flies in the face of a lot of the advice you see on modeling tutorials stuff, because this is loaded with n-gons, and there's triangles stuck in here and there, and just terrible crimes against modeling. But my philosophy has always been that as long as it bakes correctly and smooths correctly, I really don't care what it looks like. The aim is not to be pretty, the aim is to get the prop done and in the game. So with this done, this looks good to me. I don't see any obvious issues leaping out at me, any smoothing problems. So we're just going to roll with this, I think. And next up, we'll look at the low poly, which, like I said, is basically done. And we'll UV it, just because I want to show you that process. And yeah, let's do that. So, the low poly, which in terms of hard surface stuff being done with this technique is pretty straightforward. You've got we've got the mesh that we copied off, and the only thing I've modified here is if I go back to the high poly, you can see there's a lot more geometry here in the center area, which we don't really need on the low poly because that doesn't affect the silhouette at all. It's an interior curve. So what I did is I grabbed every second edge loop down the high poly and deleted it, which makes the edge here somewhat coarser, but since we're a low poly, I don't think it matters all that much. This puts the low poly just shy of 400 triangles, which I think is fine. And just for reference, you can't see because my head's in the way, but the high poly comes in just shy of 4,500 triangles, which is ludicrously low for a high poly mesh. And all we have to do now is UV it. So when it comes to UVing this, I've covered the way that I unwrap low poly meshes back in a prior video, which again I will link above. And but there is a trick you can use if you have something not excessively complicated. Using this method, you can use a shortcut. So again, using the vertex normal toolkit, we're going to smooth this mesh out to 30 degrees. And then use this button to select the hard edges. Now that is, or those are, all of your hard edge seams right there. So by selecting those, then go to the unwrap tool and tell it to unwrap. You've got your UV islands already broken out. Now, you do have to relax these and pack them, but that's a shortcut if you've got a really complicated mesh, or it's at the very least a quick jumping off point to get you started on your unwrap. I don't do it like this. I do it kind of manually, depending on where I see convex edges and things like that. So I'm going to unwrap this mesh and come back, and we'll look at what I ended up with. So here's the mesh as I would unwrap it. I tend to put things into larger islands, based on whether they have a convex edge or not and stuff like that. It just depends on whatever your preferences are and how you get the cleanest bakes. I also went ahead and triangulated this ahead of time because, like I say, we had a bunch of n-gons of things laying around. And with Modo, it's not as big of an issue because I'll show you in a second they sort of address this. But in most modeling apps, it's best to triangulate the mesh ahead of time because you want a consistent triangulation between your baker and the game engine. You want them to agree because if they don't agree, they may turn one edge a different way, which ends up with a shading error. So consistency is key when it comes to triangulation. Now, like I say, I did it manually here, but I didn't have to because if you go to your preferences, your FBX exporter, you can tell it when it's when the export geometry is happening to triangulate the mesh for you. And since I bake in Substance Painter and not in Modo, triangulating the mesh on the way out the door solves that issue for me because it gets triangulated once by Modo, and then everybody uses that same mesh from Substance to UE4 to whatever other apps I want to involve in the process. But that's neither here nor there. So we've got a mesh that's unwrapped, and we've got it triangulated. And I typically, just because I like to make sure that I'm set up absolutely correctly, as I'll redo the smoothing one last time on this mesh. I'll set it back to 179 so it's all one smoothing group, then break on the UV boundaries. That's going to give me, well, that's what I need to do to bake correctly, because otherwise, more shading errors. So I'm going to export these meshes and pull them over into Substance Painter, and I'll see you there. Okay, so as a final thing, let's bake this out and see what it looks like. I've set up a new project. I've pulled the low poly in. Now what I usually do is I'll bake out a quick normal, just real fast. I got the high poly assigned here, but I'm going to just bake out a 512 normal just so I can verify that things are set up correctly. Now one thing you may have seen there is how quickly that baked. With your high polys being not millions of triangles, the baking is very quick, so you can iterate fast. And taking a quick look around, I can see that this looks like it's all set up correctly. Yeah, the back there that I immersed all that all baked correctly because of the convex edge. That's fine. And these corners all have nice beveling. Okay, sweet. So I like that. So I will go back in here, set that up to 2048, turn on all the other maps, and tell it to bake those out. Now it's going to run off and do that. That'll probably take a little bit of time, so I'm going to pause this and come right back. So we're back. That only saved about 10 seconds, so I really didn't need to pause that. But you can see we've got the bake done now. Everything looks good. The edges are all nice and beveled looking and soft. And if I throw a smart material on here, let's just grab this this painted metal. You can see that we're ready to start texturing this up and and get it into a game engine. And that's how that technique works. So that's the technique. This video seems like maybe it was a little longer than you were expecting, but we had a bit of groundwork to cover. We had to talk about smoothing and triangulation and caveats and topology and so on and so forth. But once you've got this nailed down in your head, it's actually much faster than building traditional high poly meshes. Now, is it perfect for every prop? No. Is it perfect for every situation? Hell no. But you have to pick and choose your battles. And this is good for some stuff, in certain cases, just like any other technique. So my suggestion would be to learn it, have this tool in your mental toolbox, and use it when appropriate. Thanks for watching. So, the low polying of the UV. The what?